There was a woman on board Noah's Ark who saved all of humanity, and the Bible never mentions her name. This is not a neglect. It is one of the most disturbing and deliberate silences in all of sacred history. For centuries, theologians have overlooked a question that changes everything we believe about the flood. If Noah was chosen because he was perfect in his generations, what do we really know about the woman who accompanied him? The canonical biblical texts provide us with not a single clue about their origin, family, or ancestral lineage. But there are ancient traditions, apocryphal texts, and rabbinic sources that dared to say his name. And what those texts reveal about her could completely rewrite the narrative of the Ark and human purity. The truth that no one has told you is that Noah's wife could have carried a forbidden genetic inheritance. An inheritance that connected directly with the most feared and powerful beings of the antediluvian world, the Nephilim. This is not a minor detail. If true, it means that the giant's genes entered the Ark with Noah, and that the humanity that emerged from the flood was not as pure nor as separate from that blood as we always believed. To understand why this matters, we must first comprehend who this long-forgotten woman really was. Genesis describes Noah as a righteous man, blameless in his generations, who walked faithfully with God. That word, generations, in Hebrew toldot, is key. Many scholars interpret it as lineage or genealogy. Noah's purity was understood not only as moral purity, but also as the integrity of blood untainted by angels. But that description applies exclusively to Noah, never explicitly to his wife or his family. The sacred text introduces Noah's wife simply as his woman, without a name, without a story, without origin. This omission in a culture where lineage was everything is extraordinarily striking to scholars. In the biblical world, the name was identity, destiny, and genealogical connection to previous generations. Not naming a person was, in a way, to deny them official existence within the history of the people. However, Noah's wife not only existed, but was essential for the survival of the entire human species. So, why did the sacred text choose to erase it from the record? What was in it that should not be mentioned? To find answers, we must go beyond the biblical canon and explore the texts that were excluded. The Book of Jubilees, an ancient Hebrew text from the 2nd century before Christ, gives us a specific name. According to the Jubilees, Noah's wife was named Emzara, daughter of Rachiel, who was in turn the son of Methuselah the elder. This fact is revealing. It would make Emzara a direct relative of Noah, probably a second cousin. Marriage between close relatives was practiced in the antediluvian world without the later restrictions. But the medieval rabbinical tradition offers a completely different name for Noah's mysterious wife. The Midrash and other texts like the Sefer HaYashar identify Noah's wife as a woman named Naamah. Naamah appears in Genesis as the daughter of Lamech and sister of Tubal-Cain, the great ancient metalworker. This Naamah belonged to the line of Cain, that cursed branch that was marked and separated from the descendants of Seth. And here begins the part of the story that calls into question the entire paradigm of purity before the flood. The line of Cain was the one that, according to some interpretations, first mixed with the fallen sons of God. Genesis 6 describes how the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. From those unions were born the Nephilim, the giants of the ancient world, beings of unprecedented power and violence. Tradition associates this genetic and spiritual corruption mainly with the descendants of Cain. If Naamah was from that lineage, and if the rabbis were right in identifying her as Noah's wife, the picture changes. But the tradition about Naamah does not stop at her genealogy. Her very name carries enormous symbolic weight. Naamah in Hebrew means the pleasant or the delightful, a name that several texts associate with seduction and power. Some commentators of the Talmud considered that Naamah was a figure of supernatural beauty and dark influence. Certain late Kabbalistic texts directly turn her into a demon, fallen angel, or nocturnal spirit. However, other sources rehabilitate her and present her as a virtuous woman who learned from the generations. The very ambiguity of these traditions tells us something fundamental. Naamah was a figure that generated discomfort, a woman whose power, lineage, or nature did not easily fit into the clean categories of the canonical narrative. And that discomfort, we argue here, may be precisely the key to why the Bible chose to silence it. The name Naamah appears once in the entire canonical Genesis, but its trace in later tradition is immense. Some modern researchers believe that Naamah was a pre-Israelite cult figure absorbed into the narrative. Her presence in the biblical text as the daughter of Cain's Lamech is not coincidental. It is a sign that few have deciphered. The line of Cain produced the first city builders, musicians, blacksmiths, and also the most violent. Tubal-Cain, brother of Naamah, is the first metal worker of bronze and iron, according to the text of Genesis. If Naamah grew up in that environment of power, forbidden knowledge, and cultural mixing, her nature was complex. Let's return to the text of Genesis to examine another crucial aspect that is rarely discussed in modern sermons. When God decides to destroy the earth, he commands Noah to enter the ark with his family, his wife, sons, and daughters-in-law. The explicit purity mentioned is that of Noah, not that of his family as a differentiated and equally pure collective. His three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, also entered with their respective wives, women of unspecified origin. Regarding the lineage of those daughters-in-law, Genesis maintains an even more absolute silence than it does about the wife. Some apocryphal traditions suggest that at least one of the daughters-in-law might have had problematic ancestry. But if Noah's own wife was of Cainite lineage or had Nephilim blood, the problem predates the daughters-in-law. This raises a theologically significant question. Was the flood truly a total genetic purification? If contaminated genes entered the ark through the woman who slept beside the only righteous man on earth, then post-Diluvian humanity was born already with that legacy in its veins, without biological continuity interruption. This theory would explain something that has puzzled biblical researchers for entire generations. Because after the flood, the Nephilim or giants reappear in the biblical records with surprising speed. In the Book of Numbers, we find the Anakim, giants who terrorize the spies sent by Moses to Canaan. In Samuel, Goliath and his family of Philistine giants appear, beings of proportions beyond what was normal. If the flood exterminated all the Nephilim, how do we explain the reappearance of giants in the subsequent period? The traditional explanation points to Noah's daughters-in-law as possible carriers of mixed genes or descent, but a deeper reading of the apocryphal sources points to an even more primary vector, the wife herself. If Naamah was, as rabbinic texts suggest, the daughter of Lamech from the line of Cain, her blood was ancient. And if that Cainite line had already been contaminated by the union with the fallen Watchers, the equation is complete. The Book of Enoch, one of the most important texts for understanding the antediluvian world, illuminates this context. Enoch describes in detail how the Watchers descended, took human wives, and taught forbidden arts. Those unions produced a hybrid race whose blood gradually diluted and mixed into the general population. Not all the Nephilim were visible giants. Some carried the legacy in recessive genes without physical manifestation. This distinction is fundamental to understanding how that lineage could have survived the judgment of the flood. A woman carrying Nephilim genes without physical giant traits would have passed any visual selection of the Ark. And I would have entered it not as an infiltrator, but as part of the family chosen by Almighty God Himself. Here, the theological argument reaches its most unsettling and philosophically provocative point of the entire narrative. If God chose Noah, knowing that his wife carried that legacy, then purity was never just genetic. Perhaps Noah's purity was moral, spiritual, and purposeful, not a matter of chromosomes with no mixture whatsoever. This interpretation opens a radically different theology of the flood that few traditions dare to explore. The flood would not then be a purification of blood, but a purification of intention, of violence, and of evil. The Nephilim were not condemned for their DNA, but for their deeds of violent domination, the corruption of the earth. And a woman who bore that lineage, but chose the path of justice, could very well be in the Ark. This reading rehabilitates Noah's wife in a way that the canon never allowed to be made explicit. She was not the weak link in the chain of purity. She was the proof that redemption transcends origin. And yet, it was that complex woman who could have shared the most sacred space in human history. The Ark was not just a boat. It was the belly of the world, the womb where humanity was forever redefined. Whoever entered that womb determined forever what we are, where we come from, and what we carry in our blood. But let's return to the historical and textual evidence, so we don't get lost in speculation without documentary anchors. The Book of Jubilees, written probably between 160 and 150 BC, is our oldest text. In the Jubilees, Emzara is presented as a woman from Noah's own extended family, without complications. Her genealogy in that text connects her with Seth, the pure line, not with Cain or any problematic lineage. This directly contradicts the medieval rabbinical tradition that identifies her with Naamah from the line of Cain. We therefore have two completely opposing ancient traditions about the identity of this very woman. Either it was Emzara of pure Setite blood, which would eliminate the problem of contamination from the outset. Either it was Naamah, from the cursed line of Cain, which introduces a mixing vector within the Ark itself. This contradiction between sources is not accidental. It reflects an ancient theological debate that was never resolved. And the fact that this debate was not resolved partly explains the silence of the canonical Genesis regarding his name. Naming her would have forced the sacred text to take a stance in a controversy that was politically impossible. It was safer to leave her unnamed, an anonymous wife that no one could claim for any specific tradition. This type of deliberate silence appears in other parts of the biblical text when the topic is too explosive. The scribes of the Second Temple period were masters in the art of omitting what they could not safely include. Let us also consider what Noah's wife represented from a broader anthropological and narrative perspective. She is, along with Eve, the woman with the greatest demographic impact in all of biblical and possibly human history. Because if the flood reduced humanity to 8 people, from those 8 we all modern humans descend. Every living human today on Earth is a direct descendant of that woman whose name we do not even know. Your genetic code, whatever its origin, flows in every person who breathes on the surface of this planet. This makes her, in purely biological terms, the second mother of the entire human species without exception. And yet, the great cultural narrative of the West has almost completely ignored it for 2,000 years. While Noah has inspired temples, cathedrals, paintings, symphonies, and philosophical debates of universal scope, she remained in the shadows, nameless, voiceless, reduced to an absolutely minimal biological and narrative function. Archaeology cannot tell us who she was, but it can tell us something about the world in which she lived. Sumerian texts of the flood, such as the poem of Gilgamesh, also include the hero's wife in the ark. In the Sumerian version, Utnapishtim and his wife survive together, and she also lacks a proper name in the text. This cultural parallel suggests that the silence about the flood survivor's wife was a regional pattern, a pattern that reflects the position of women in the epic narratives of the ancient Near East in general. However, in the biblical case, there is a crucial difference that modern researchers have begun to point out. The Genesis, unlike other ancient texts, does name many women when the narrative requires it. Name Eva, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, Raquel, Deborah, and Ruth. The omission of Noah is not cultural, it is selective. And when something is selectively omitted in the Bible, the correct question is not why it is missing, but what it hides. Let's now explore a lesser-known theory, but documented in sources from the early church fathers. Some Greek fathers, such as Origen and Clement of Alexandria, mention discussions about Noah's family. Origins indicated that Noah's perfection did not necessarily imply the perfection of those around him. This theological distinction was uncomfortable for the narrative of a flood as a total and absolute purification of the world. Because if purity was only Noah's, then the divine plan to start anew did not guarantee a fresh beginning. It only guaranteed a new Noah, surrounded by people whose spiritual and genetic purity was, at best, partial. This thought also appears in the fact that Cam himself, Noah's son, commits an offense immediately. After the flood, Ham sees his father's nakedness and defames him before his brothers, provoking the curse of Canaan. This disturbing episode occurs almost immediately after the waters recede and the ark rests on dry land. How could a man born into the most righteous family on earth, at that historical moment, become corrupted so quickly? Some ancient interpreters responded that Cam's nature, his tendency towards evil, came from his maternal blood. Not from Noah's blood, which was pure, but from his mother's line, the origin of which no one in the text had clarified. This reading, although speculative, fits perfectly with the theory that Noah's wife had mixed blood. If his blood was Cainite or Nephilim, that inheritance would have manifested differently in each of his children. Shem, the firstborn, from whose line the Semites and eventually Abraham himself descend, seems the purest. Japheth, the eldest in some traditions, is the ancestor of the nations of the north and the far west. But Cam, the troublesome one, is the father of Canaan, Egypt, Cush, and Put, territories associated with pagan traditions. And it is in those Canaanite lands where the giants, the descendants of the Anakim and Rephaim, will later reappear. The connection between Cam's line, the Nephilim line, and Noah's wife forms a triangle that few have mapped out. However, it is there, in the texts, waiting to be read by those who dare to cross the boundaries of the canon. Let's now examine what the texts of Kumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, say about Noah's family and their surroundings. The apocryphal Genesis of Kumran, discovered in 1947, contains an extraordinary and rarely cited passage from the text. In that passage, Noah himself is born with such extraordinary physical characteristics that his father Lamech is alarmed. Lamech fears that the child is not his, but the son of one of the Watchers, the fallen angels from the Book of Enoch. This narrative reverses the problem. It is not just Noah's wife of dubious origin, but Noah himself who is questioned. Lamech questions his wife Bat-Enosh about whether the child's father was an angel or a being from the holy ones of heaven. She vows that the child was conceived legitimately, that there was no union with any watcher or celestial being. This scene from Kumran reveals the extent to which the mixture between humans and angels was a real and everyday fear. So real that even the father of the most righteous man in the world doubted the nature of his own newborn son. And if Lamech doubted Bat-Enosh, Noah's mother, what should we think of the unknown wife of the son? If Noah's mother already raised suspicions of angelic mixing, the family environment was already tainted with doubts. And the wife that Noah chose for himself in that cultural context of widespread mixing was also not exempt from them. Let's return to Naamah, the most intriguing candidate in rabbinic tradition to be identified as the wife. The Zohar, the fundamental text of medieval Kabbalah, dedicates entire passages to describing the power of Naamah. In the Zohar, Naamah is one of the four mothers of demons, along with Lilith, Agrat Bat Melat, and Aisheth Zenunim. However, this late demonization could be a later reinterpretation of a figure that was originally human. In the process of building the Kabbalistic system, several biblical women were transformed into demonic archetypes. Lilith, Adam's first wife, according to some traditions, is the most well-known example of this process of demonization. Naamah could have undergone the same process of a powerful woman with uncertain lineage to a fully formed demon. What is notable is that the Kabbalah specifically associates it with seduction, dreams, and nocturnal procreation. These attributes in the Kabbalistic system point precisely to the powers that the Nephilim had, according to Enoch. The sons of the Watchers seduced corrupted dreams and perverted human reproduction, according to those texts. If Naamah inherited those traits as a bearer of her blood, her late demonization would have a clear textual logic. And her identification as Noah's wife in medieval rabbinic sources could be the memory of a tradition that knew or suspected that the woman of the ark was not as simple as Genesis wanted to suggest. Finally, let us consider the impact of this debate on our understanding of modern post-diluvian humanity. If Noah's wife carried Cain's blood, or Nephilim, all of humanity today carries that legacy without exception. Not as an inevitable curse, but as part of a complex inheritance that includes both the divine and the fallen. According to this reading, we are descendants of the tension between two worlds, the pure world of Set and the world of Cain. That tension was not resolved by the flood. It was preserved within the ark and transmitted to all generations. The modern human is not the product of a clean new beginning, but rather the continuation of an ancient story. A story where the sacred and the profane, the divine and the fallen, coexist in the same chain of ancestral DNA. This is perhaps the deepest and least comfortable message that the forgotten figure of Noah's wife conveys to us. We are not pure. We never were. And the flood was not designed to make us pure, but to give us another chance. And if the one who entered was not pure in the sense we always assume, our story is darker and richer. Noah's wife was not omitted for being irrelevant. She was silenced because her true name would have revealed too much. Her identity, whether Emzara of pure lineage or Naamah of mixed blood, challenged the narrative of the perfect flood. The silence of Genesis about her is not empty. It is the echo of a debate that the sacred writers could not win. And what that debate suggests is that Noah's purity was never the purity of his family, but only that of his soul. If this mystery has marked you, subscribe now. There are truths buried in ancient texts that will change everything.